product that they had decided to put on the market, and this is actually a breakfast pastry, a sort of high-quality breakfast pastry that would be sold in grocery stores. And we went all through, in our little vignette, we went all through the story here. Now, the center part of this actually received a lot of attention because of the new product, the nature of new product development and testing, all the way up to the board of directors of the company figuring, should we build a plant or convert a plant to produce this product? So a lot of money at stake, a lot of time and effort, and much care in both cases that the product that emerges is an identical consumption experience with every unit. And so a lot of care and concern put into planning here. And then we just put the same distribution channels without, obviously they would be more complex as well. So then we want to make the point that, well, we have had coffee and a breakfast pastry, but for this breakfast, there's multiple people and they have multiple preferences. And the marketing systems are providing all this stuff for that one event. On the right side, you see the kitchen support system, which is an interesting recognition here that the marketing systems delivered these as well in the past. And many things that we use as consumers are consumed over longer periods of time. So annual data really don't capture the benefits that marketing is providing, the marketing systems are providing to the daily lives of people in our society. Then, now I'm not pretending we're going to go through this, but these are two important charts for our work. The first one is we took those two examples and we identified activities that went on in order for these systems to work. And we identified 75 activities at the top. And those little numbers in parentheses are our attempts to conceive of marketing managers. To what extent do marketing managers control that activity? To what extent do they not control it but have some influence, and to what extent do they neither control nor influence the activity? And obviously consumers are relevant to this system, as are governments. So I'll get to our conclusions about that in a minute. At the bottom, panel E, what we did here was we took those two systems and then in a systematic fashion we began to aggregate across all coffees, all breakfast pastries, and just continued to go, and everyone that's involved, every marketing system that's involved in the society. And so we end up with the aggregate marketing system. And we come up with some essential points. Selling, purchasing, and use occurs throughout the system. The significance of infrastructure, careful planning, coordination, and repetition. Very structurally sophisticated, very practiced, and routinely provides, for example, breakfast for 100 million households in the US every day. And that's just a trivial portion of the aggregate marketing system activity. The government also is an important element of these systems. In many ways, a facilitator of marketing as well as a constrainer. And as I mentioned, we had over 75 listings of marketing system activities just in those two examples. So when we did that and looked at the marketing manager's control, I think this is a really important point, that according to our count, 30 of the 75 activities were controlled by people we call marketing managers. So the way we study marketing today, we're hitting 30 of these things. We're not hitting 45. And so if we're interested in a larger view of marketing, we need to move beyond just the marketing manager's decisions and take into account what else is going on that's closely related to operations of the system. And overall, the aggregate marketing system in the US is used, and I mean, this would fit for any society, but the role of governments and cultures does have an impact on each one. So there will be different aggregate marketing systems as we go across the world in societies. but a huge practice and powerful. We tried to estimate how many people work in this system, and we have 30 million for sure, but the data don't allow us to really be specific beyond that point, but we're quite sure that the number is way higher than that. So it's a really, really important part of our economy. And it deserves more attention in our PhD programs and from our College of Marketing Thinkers generally. Now, to move to the next notion of my talk here, is knowledge being lost from our field. This is another paper that I'd highly recommend to you. I'm not biased or anything. This was a long project where we tried to look at the 100 years of work in academia and characterize how academics were approaching the field of marketing. So it's an historical look, and we see much change in the nature of academic thought over this time. The four eras here, now obviously there was thought about marketing before 1900 or so, but it wasn't called marketing and it wasn't identified as a separate field. Starting around 1900s and 1920, there were sort of independent efforts around the country, some in New York, some in Philadelphia, and then much in the Midwest actually, and some on the West Coast. But the Midwest was, and the Big Ten schools were prominent early thinkers about this area called marketing. And the reason was they were concerned about agriculture and distribution systems to feed the country as it was expanding westward. So when we did this, we actually used the University of Illinois Library a lot because it's fantastic on early marketing work. Then from 1920 to 1950, we have a period we call formalizing the field. That's when the journals began. That's when the association, the AMA, began. That's when textbooks were laying out principles of marketing. And Shelby, by the way, has a great paper on functional theory that I actually think functional theory would be terrific today. So I think there's a lot of really good work that was done back here that's just not around very much anymore in our minds. And I view that that's being lost. Then around 1950, and that 50 is really the early elements of this. I think more strongly it came into effect in the late 50s and 60s, and then strongly in the 70s. It was a paradigm shift. Marketing became imbued with the notion of helping management make better decisions, academic marketers, and bringing in the sciences. Am I in trouble on time? Okay. And then well, actually, I have a little thing on each part here, but since I already talked about it, maybe I'll skip through it. But this is the notion. We have much more. This is the 31-page paper. There's a lot of stuff in here. And so the Journal of Retailing is the first marketing journal. Began in 1925 at NYU. Journal of Marketing began in 1936. And it's interesting to go back and look at those papers. Most of the articles were single-authored, and most of them were short, and not particularly empirical, and many were authored by business people and government officials. So it was a very shared view of thinking in the field. And I think of this slide, I'll just point to the bottom. I don't want to take too long. But it was interesting that academics of that period seemed to have more of a willingness to stand aside and give empathetic critiques of business, as opposed to viewing that their role was to step in and help business people do a better job. This era 3 is really the precursor for today, and it's amazing to some extent on how these views persist today, and we still build on them. And again, the two big notions were marketing as science and marketing as management. And there was a huge growth in the, here's what some of the things that, we won't have time today, obviously, but some of the things that came up during that period, which are still very popular for us today. So the big change occurred during that time. And then around 1980, it was like the field just grew and got stronger and stronger in these particular directions it was going. And so we identified a separate era, and I was having difficulty figuring out why I thought it was 1980 particularly, until I ran into, obviously there are big changes occurring in the world with globalization. But this was the reason, the outpouring of new publication outlets. I think this slide that's coming up is just spectacular. There's the new journals that began during this period. And so something, it seems like, and these were not done as any sort of concerted effort. These were pretty independently decided for their own purposes. But you see how specialization is coming into the publish or perish environment. And I think some very worthwhile journals are in here. JAMS was already founded before this. But there weren't very many journals before this, and then here came the deluge. And Shelby already told you I was going to complain about fragmentation. Specialization, I think, is a wonderful thing, but I'm concerned that knowledge is disappearing from our field, and the doctoral programs are not transmitting the full range of marketing knowledge, not at all. And that was in 1981. In 2002, I wrote an essay in the Journal of Marketing, which Terry Clark actually invited, and I thought it was a tremendous series that Terry ran as book review editor. He invited some people to write about their thinking about the field, and those essays are really interesting. And so the crucial question I would raise is, are young marketing scholars, do they even realize they have a choice in what they can do? So I think, number one, I don't think we're monitoring the impacts that marketing is having on the world nearly to the extent that we could. I would concur with Ajay's comments very much about immersion. I simply would expand the immersion a little bit to the aggregate beyond a firm focus. I think the aggregate marketing system is really powerful and is actually intrinsic to our study of the field. I think fragmentation is powerful and it allows people to go deeper, and in many ways is really good, but it does cause knowledge to be lost, and I think it should be addressed in PhD education. I think that the attention to theoretical issues today is really appropriate, and it's past time for us to continue to look for ways to enhance scholarship in our field.